Brother Frank Houtz from the state of Kentucky, and he did a wonderful job on the other night of bringing a subject to us that opens the hearts and the minds of all Yahweh's people. He's going to go into the second part of where he left off and gear your ears to hear, because this is life-changing stuff. I give to you Elder Frank Houtz.
Well, thank you for your kind introduction, but I am going to have to figure out how to get that off the screen. Okay, it's back on my screen now. If there is a way I can get that to drop without... Well, I've got it out here now, so I can. It's in my. It's in my.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to turn this a little bit, so maybe when I'm talking to you guys, I'll be at the right general way of the screen here. And since I found out we're supposed to have a light on the top of our head, I'll get it figured out to where maybe, okay, there we got the light. Yeah. All right. Now, we've already talked about all this, so I'm going to try to get it on up on the slide a little bit further to where we stopped. Okay, if you'll remember, we came to this point right here where I said one must become ectosynthetic before he can progress to the technical level. Now we're on conscious level of learning. This is basically first grade through 10th grade, so to speak. You want to talk about it that way. Now, that doesn't mean... I want to do a readdress here on this. This is not a measure of intelligence. And that is a mistaken notion if we try to introduce this as a measure of intelligence. This is a measure of how complex we are analyzing any topic, what we're taking into considerations. In the very first, down here on the recitation stage, we talked about you're basically dealing with yes and no answers, black and white, polarization, that type of stuff. And what you do is you begin to take in more and more information. After you learn how to follow the systems that we have in place in our society. Guys, you don't get anywhere fighting the system. I'll give you a little hint here. You know, if you want to change something, you need to figure out how to change it by using the system.
Amen.
And so way too often, people think that they are being spiritual by confronting the system, and in reality, they are making it to where they're not going to make any progress whatsoever.
Absolutely.
So anyway, you got to learn the system, and you got to learn the system to use it to your advantage. That's what this education process is that we learn what's accepted within a culture, and then we try to use that which is accepted to our betterment. Put it that way. Okay, well, anyway, as you go, you have to learn to be ectosynthetic. Now, let me redefine that one more time. Ectosynthesis is understanding. Ecto is the word outsider or other. So it's understanding the other. That means we have our little, I'm going to introduce you to another term. This is the word holon.
Again?
Holon. Okay, we are all community holons. And what we do is we're at the center of our holon. A holon is like an onion.
Oh,
If you have an onion, you got this little center ball, and then it's surrounded by another skin or layer, and then it's got another layer on it, another layer, and it continues to expand. And so we are all holons, and at the center of us is us. But we have groups that we can work with around us. Now, you all have this kahal here that you meet with, okay? This is your next holon, the next layer. But, you may be able to go out beyond that and work with other either messianic groups or whatever groups. And then you can start building on with churches and things like that. Well, we can work with these churches. And those are your holons. Those are your spheres of influence. Okay? By the way, you have to understand those spheres of influence before you can have any influence on them.
right on.
You have to be able to transcend barriers that have been put up and know where the barriers are. You have to understand those barriers. So this is all a learning process. And of course, the outsider is the ones that are beyond your holons, beyond the way that you have regularly interact with people. So those, you can't get away from it. You have outer holons that affect you that go much, much further than you are willing to extend your influence. You just as well not deal with some groups, and I understand that. We're going to talk about some of the groups you probably won't want to deal with, and we're not going to talk by names because it's of no advantage to us to talk by names. But to talk by actions, that gives us an idea of what we're worried about, because it's not the name of the group, it's the action that the group does. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about actions here today. So the reason you can't get to the technical level of analysis, in the technical level you have testing. You're supposed to be able to test your ideas. Well, you cannot test an idea that you already have your mind made up, whether it's right or not. You see, you're not being subjective at that point. And if you only see one position, you only understand one position, and it's yours, then you can't test to see the fallacy in the other position, because all you're doing is building up a straw man and knocking it over. And so anytime that you test something, you have to be able to test and see if your critic is right. Now, it doesn't matter whether this is chemistry, physics, theology. Testing is the level that you're on when you're talking about the technical level. That's the next step. Okay, so at this point, if we're in the methodical stage, we've learned how to look at it from a methodical process, then at that point, we must learn people who are doing things differently, learn their perspective, and be able to see if maybe they got a point. Maybe they're right. Let's consider whether they're right or not, and let's gather enough information, and then we can test it. See if the actual procedure or testing procedure will prove their point or prove ours. Now, if you noticed, I did something there. I threw in to prove their point or prove ours. Okay, you are at the point of duality almost again. Because you're thinking, okay, I'm going to prove this other, or I'm going to prove mine. And there's a possibility that it's more than that, which Bonnie just pointed out. So what about both? Okay? If we are limiting it just to two, mine or his, we're most likely going to read it the way we want it to be. We're going to make sure that the test proves our point. So that hasn't helped you at all. That is a very common thing when we have not studied the other side well enough to know whether or not it's a viable option. And remember, the only way you can make a choice between two doctrines is that you know the other side well enough that you could present it and make people think that it's your belief. And when you get to that point, and you've argued it well enough to where those people who agree with that side would say, yes, you're saying it right, you actually know it well enough to make a choice between the two doctrines. Otherwise, you have just been parroting what you've been taught. So, that can be a real problem, can't it? We have to become ectosynthetic. We have to take that extra step. Now, I'm going to tell you it's a dangerous step. It's a very dangerous step. And it needs to be a step taken with great guidance. It needs to be taken by somebody who is well tutored by someone who's already taken the step and survived it. Did you know that in seminaries, when you go to a seminary, often they will tell you that you are just about ready to lose your faith? Those who make it through and keep faith will be fine. Now, they won't tell you that in the Baptist seminary. Because it's a Baptist seminary, that means what I'm going to do is prove all our Baptist doctrine is right. Do you understand that that is not ectosynthetic and that is not moving to the technical level? They may give you technical information, but they redirect it so it proves their point. So you can go to many seminaries and not change one bit in your doctrine because everything's set up to prove your point. But if you are really being taught methods and ideas, if you're being taught Hebrew and teaching it so that you can make your own decisions, you're being taught Greek and being taught in a way that you can make your own decisions, that you can study the evidence in the text. You see, all those things mean that you are being taught on a technical level, but it has a tendency to set you in a place that is vulnerable. You are now kind of on your own between you and God, and it's a tough place. Now, this is not a tough place in science. This is not a tough place in all these other disciplines. But with theology, you're actually at a point where now you're thinking, maybe I can test God. And I'm going to give you a hint. It ain't going to happen. And if you're used to all the other fields being testable and you realize that this one's not, you see, that's a real faith shaker. So hang on, we're going to talk about it. Well, let's first look at what happens when, like what I said with the Baptist seminary, what you're doing is feeding technical information to support what you already believe. I'm going to also mention a group of people by their actions. Let me tell you what happens is that when you start progressing, you continue using the technical information, but you don't become ectosynthetic. What happens is you have a tendency to become volatile. And you can actually develop volatility to the point of being violent. So I'm going to do some switching here. We're going to go on. What happens when you do not become ectosynthetic? Booker T. Washington said, you can't hold a man down without staying down with him. I want you to think about that for a little bit. You know, the control freaks of the world try to hold people down, but in the process, they're right there in the mire with them, aren't they? Okay, so, and yeah, paranoid, and lots of things are going on. Well, there is a group of people, and people typically introduce this group by a religion name, and they're mistaken by doing that because it's not the religion that causes this. And you may even, catch on and say, oh no, Frank, it's a religion. It's not. It is in every religion. In fact, I will call it zealousness. And if you look around within the Hebrew roots Messianic movement, you have a whole bunch of very zealous people. And I'll tell you something, I love zealous people because they're the people who are going to go out and do what they believe, correct? But zeal can be misplaced.
That's correct.
And if you have misplaced zeal, it might make you do something very dangerous, incorrect in action. And I'm going to share a case, and I'm going to share with you Christianity, because when I do the description, you're going to think, okay, I know who we're talking about. Okay, I'm going to share with you in Christianity first. When I was young, I'm pretty much against the idea of abortion. I think probably everybody here is. And so what do you do if you're against the idea of abortion? You would go out and protest abortion clinics or something like that. I didn't do that, but that would be common. Well, there was a person who was very active in protesting abortion clinics, and he started using terms like, we're in a war, and these are the victims. And so now he has elevated the discussion to the point of war terms. And then when you go to war terms, you start excusing violent behavior. So what ended up happening is he shot an abortion doctor. Okay? Now, of course, that really tainted the entire anti-abortion group, because then anybody who's out protesting, you got to watch out. They may shoot an abortion doctor. They're all murderers. Okay, so this really dramatically affected the thing, and of course they got called murderers, and then before long they were calling each other murderers, and it just went awry pretty quick. Okay, that is what happens when we start using force to implement our ideas. Now, there is a group of people that a lot of Christians and a lot of Jews are afraid of today. And they're called radical, and then they give them a name. Okay, it really doesn't matter whether it's radical Jews, radical Christians. The radicalness means that they have been brought to a stage to where they are willing to use violence. And when we've been brought to a stage to where we are willing to use violence in order to implement our plan, we've really got ourselves in a sticky wicket, so to speak. Well, what happens is that we end up forming what's called a doppelganger. Now, a doppelganger is a German term. It means an evil twin. Okay, so you get this evil twin. So if you do not naturally become ectosynesthetic, then you will naturally become violent against the outsider. When you get zeal and all of that. And so what happens is that you form an evil side to your group. And so you create what I call a doppelganger, and actually that's not just me, that's a very common term. So the evil twin comes in, and then you have to deal with what happens from there. So let's we're not going to go to the technical information. Instead, we're going to go to something that I think is better understood as pseudo-technical. It's where we bring in the information, but use it. In fact, we twist it to say we're right. This is where you will find that the group, the leaders of the group, see, they're still in the shame culture. Remember, we talked about the difference between shame culture and guilt culture. They have become so involved with their group that now they identify themselves by their group. In other words, you talk about my group, and it's just like you said it to me. I call this latent hemicentric. In other words, it's hemicentric, us-centered, but it's latent in the fact that it's just continued on way past the maturity stage. You haven't matured to the next group, the exosynthetic understanding. And so because of it being latent, because you are now an adult operating in a regular fashion, just like an egocentric person is going to make everybody in the room do whatever he wants. It's all about me, okay? It becomes, it's all about my group. And if you aren't with my group, then you're against us. Now, it seems like Yeshua made a statement that was to the opposite of that. It's kind of like, if you're not against us, then you're kind of for us. But instead, this is the locking stage. If you are, if you're not with us, then you're against us, and therefore you become the enemy. And if you are the enemy, I can do anything within my power to destroy you. Incidentally, we're seeing this in the press today. This is a common behavior that's done in the press where they're going to try to destroy the other side, even if they might be reasonable people. They're going to destroy them anyway because they aren't a part of my group. And it's funny, it's gotten to where it has to be my group. It's not my belief system. Guys, if you all think that all the Republicans agree and all the Democrats agree, you're totally off base here. You know, they're actually saying you got to be a part of my group, even though you may not be voting in a way that I would like you to vote. So this is latent hemicentric behavior. And all of them are going to try to tell you we're handling this in a technical manner. We're giving you technical information and you're just refusing what I'm sharing with you. You see, it becomes violent. And we're watching it grow right now. I hope something changes soon. But I'll tell you, it's going to have to change in those who believe in God first. Okay? Because if we don't change, the judgment comes to the house of Yah first.
Absolutely.
Okay? So. Right. Right. We do deceive ourselves with this. So, this pseudo-technical thing now takes the technical information, makes it look technical, but does everything to support oneself. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, an airplane was shot down. Now, it was considered a wreck. They knew it just disappeared out of the sky, but it was obviously shot down by a government entity. The government entity that shot it down, it was just a passenger plane, it wasn't an army thing. The government entity let them come in and do an investigation. But when they did the investigation and they found out that the government shot a missile up there, they called it lies. No, these are all lies. Okay, why are they lies? Because it made them look bad. They didn't want them to find that. See, what happens is that when you start hearing the information and that you start defending yourself by putting the accusation on everybody else and you vehemently state that this is not true. And they're not telling the truth. They're making us look bad. They're not telling the truth. You see, you begin to discern truth by whether or not it makes you look good or not. And so truth isn't what is factual, truth becomes what I want it to be. I want to be the victim. I'm going to present myself as a victim, and you all are victimizing me. So you're lying. Okay, that can happen, but often it is just trying to set yourself up to be able to present your view as superior, and you're the right ones. Okay, so you're stuck when you're in this position. You have frozen the entire culture because of the shame you've put on there. You've frozen the entire culture to where they can no longer grow. And that means that they cannot progress to a stage of maturity where they will actually fit into society and be with society. This is why people who use these techniques, they'll form a doppelganger. Let me give you a doppelganger effect. And I'm not trying to knock the two people, okay, or the two groups. This is not attacking one and agreeing with the other. I'm just going to use it as an example. Okay, we first had Israel, who was formed because of the trauma that they went through with the Holocaust. And, you know, they came in, they got into this property in this land that had been deeded to them by the British monarchy, and also the United Nations got involved. So they make this land, and then they end up splitting the land after they have made this territory. They split it, and they create a doppelganger, somebody who now needs to call for independence against the Israelis. See, the Israelis were looking for independence from Great Britain. They got their independence, but created a doppelganger who is now going to attack them and demand the same thing that they got from Great Britain. See, that's what's going on. Now, this has to be resolved in a way, and it cannot be resolved on this level. So the only way it's going to be able to be resolved is to bring all parties beyond this. But if you are in a culture that reinterprets everything to fit how you see it, then what's going to happen is you freeze the entire civilization on that level of thinking. Now, I'm going to share something in this room. Probably shouldn't because we're going online, but anyway, I'm going to share something. It's going to be shocking to you that I would say this. Okay, but I think you all need to hear it. The Palestinians are not bad people. They love their families. They want what's good for their families. They want a life that is peaceful. I'm not sure they understand fully what peaceful is, and I'm not sure that they fully understand how to get that. It's not a problem with the people. It's a problem with the society that's trapped them where they are. Okay? And so, unless the Messianic movement understands that the Palestinians are not the problem, and I'm not trying to say the Israelis are. What I'm trying to say is that we have something here that we have to go beyond. We have to be able to progress outside of this. And there's certain things that will help it. One, education. And there's things that will hinder it. Not letting people be educated. Okay? And if you're going to educate in the vein of it's going to be my way, this is truth, based on this evil twin process, you can't get out of it. It's going to be war and war and war. So, I would like us to be able to look at it in a much more complex way and recognize that that is not the way to handle it. And if we keep on trying to feed both sides of the war, you know, people who are taking sides and saying, hey, man, the Israelis, they're the good ones, you know. Okay, that does not help. There are people being harmed on both sides. I'm not saying that there's intentional harm going on. I don't think the Israelis in any way are trying to intentionally harm the Palestinians. But the Palestinians are being harmed because of things that have to be done. Some of it's because of their own leadership. But if they can find a way to get out of this trap that they're in and stand above it, then that can be done. Now, one of the ways that you can do this for people to get together and begin to understand each other. So there are groups in Israel that are now forming that are people who have lost their children in this plight, and they have both Palestinians and Jews together, getting together. And the idea is, let's get together and know one another. That is learning ectosunicism. Okay, so they're paralyzed here. We need to get out of it. Let's go back and look at what the technical level should be and how we should naturally progress if we become ectosunicistic. Because the technical level answers the question, why? You know, there's a whole lot to that Palestinian-Israeli debate that the whys could truly help, could truly bring it about. But the whys are not going to be the answers that everybody currently says. It's, he hit me first. You know, that never works. So you have to get beyond that. But anyway, we need to get to the testing stage. And the testing stage is going to present a proof. So we can actually prove. Testable means you can recreate the situation and you get the same effect every time. So one learns scientific analysis and begins to operate by testable methods. I say scientific analysis, and you may say, well, that's good for science. No, scientific analysis is good for everything you study. The methodology is correct, and they've called this scientific analysis, so I'm going to continue with that. So let's break this down into a three-dimensional board, and let's look and see what is going on within this level three-dimensionally. First of all, we have scientific analysis. But with scientific analysis, there's a problem. Even though you're on this stage, you may believe something, and the first scientific analysis usually indicates you're going to make the test to where it fits your perspective. And this is why there's peer journals and things like that, to have people debate back and forth. Okay? The debate enables you to learn the other and see if there isn't something from them that is a reasonable assessment of what you're doing wrong. Of course, nobody likes to hear that they're doing something wrong, so we have a tendency to defend ourselves unrealistically. But as long as you're using peer journals or peer review, and you have other people saying, no, you totally skewed it here, and then you say, how can I make a test that now takes into consideration what they're saying and proves that I am not doing that? You see, the first thing you learn is that you are a part of the test. Since you're the one creating it, it's your mind that has put together the test, and that makes you a part of it. And as long as you're a part of it, you're probably not going to get good results. So you have to be able to look from the outside. You have to be able to stand back and say, let's see what happens when I allow their test to go. Now, what ends up happening a lot of times is you do a test to prove your point, then they do a test to prove their point, and we've both proven our points. Okay. All right, now, how do we do a test that resolves a conflict between the two tests? That's the next step. So, in the proof stage, what you have to do is you have to discover maxims. Now, you often come up with a maxim that isn't a maxim. A maxim is a universal truth. In other words, it just is, everybody accepts it as true and it always works. Okay, so you come up with a maxim, that's what you're trying to prove, and so you're going to go through with your proof test, and you keep it in there. You keep it within the boundaries of this maxim. You also come up with good boundaries. But you have to come up with inclusion. You have to include the other's ideas. You see, if you're not including their ideas, you're mistakenly stacking the test in your favor. Now, this shows the boundaries. You may discover the boundaries are wrongly placed. Let me give you a good example of boundaries being different. Now, I'm not going to say that they're wrongly placed here, but they're different. Okay, Aristotle was the one who started looking at taxonomy and noticing that certain animals, when you study them, for instance, it's much easier to study a pig and find out about a human than it is to study a dolphin. No, dolphin's not good. Let's try just a heron. A bird, one of the herons. Now, why? Why would it be better? Well, a bird has feathers all over its head, all over its face, all over its body, and a human has hair. So, you know, the feathers are a totally different system. But furthermore, birds generally lay eggs, and humans generally have live birth. So there's entire systems that are needed for live birth that aren't needed for laying an egg. Okay, well, there's all kinds of things that go on with it. Your organs are more closely related, let's say, to a whale or a pig or a bat than they are to a bird, a lizard, or a fish. It's because we have similar systems. You know, fish have gills, we have lungs. You're not going to study a fish to see how we breathe. So Aristotle said we need to divide animals into categories of similar systems. And so they came up with fowl, they came up with mammals, they came up with reptiles and amphibians, they came up with fish. And so all of these were in different systems. And suddenly a whale was a mammal. It has live birth. It wasn't a fish. It doesn't have any gills. It has lungs. So you have a whole bunch of different animals in different situations. You know, they've got them in the water. You got them in the air. A bat is a mammal. It's not a bird. However, if you look in Scripture and you're reading in Scripture, you'll discover some things that are mistaken notions according to that set of categories. In Scripture, it will say that a bat is a bird. A whale is a fish. Well, some people have said, well, see, this proves that the Bible is wrong. No. It proves that the Bible is using a different set of categories in its way of categorizing animals. And see, in the Bible, it's categorized according to, if they live in the air, they're considered a bird. That means a bat, which flies in the air, is a bird. If they live on the earth, then they're considered an animal. And if they live in the sea, they're considered a fish. Very, very good categories. And the categories are true. So here we have two systems, and both systems are correct. That goes back to what Bonnie said earlier. Hey, maybe they're both right. Yeah. It depends on what you're trying to determine to understand why you would do that. Now, for instance, things that fly. A bat flies, a bird flies. Okay, well, you can look at the flying part of the system and you can find relevance. But if you're looking at their birth, a bird lays eggs and a bat gives live birth. Okay, now God is one of those, I really think that he has a sense of humor, okay? See, what he did is he invented the platypus just to give our categories a real problem. You know, the platypus has a duck like a bill like a duck. Okay, well, that's a problem. Must be a bird. Has webbed feet. Yeah, it's got to be a duck. Okay, now, it has hair all over its body. Oh, somebody made a mistake here. Okay, but it lays eggs. It's a duck. It's a duck with hair. It's a hair duck. You know, they have hair sheep. They got to have hair ducks, you know? Okay, so it's a hair duck. And then the killer. The killer. This is really a killer, guys. When they first started talking about this, Captain Cook came back from Australia and tells them about it, and the entire British nation called him a liar. I mean, it was just... They were saying, man, those Aborigines over there, they are playing tricks on you. And then he brought one back in formaldehyde. And he puts it there. And they spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how they sewed this animal together. Because this platypus who lays eggs nurses its young. You want to talk about confused children. You know, how in the world did this happen? Yeah. They're really quite unique creatures. They couldn't put them in any category. Okay, now I told these stories, and several here, I know, to give you an indication of how you make it to the next level. You see, you have to disambiguate. Now, ambiguity is where there's too much fuzzy information here that you just can't quite put it together, right? Okay. Ambiguity in language, we come up with ambiguity all the time. We're trying to nail it down so we know exactly what it says. Well, to disambiguate, that may mean you need to draw your lines a little bit better because they become too broad and they include too much, and we got to figure out what to do with this platypus. Okay, because this platypus does not fit the rest of the story here. What are we going to do with it? Australia really messed us up anyway. I mean, we had all these marsupials. I tell you what, it probably would have been better if we just blown Australia out of the water, and then all of our lines would have made sense, you know? Yeah. No, Australia's fun, and a lot of good people down under there. But anyway, the thing is that the animals in that area just didn't tend to fit our categories. So we have to disambiguate. Now, disambiguate also means that you have to be able to take yourself out of the experiment. How many of you heard of postmodernism? Postmodernism is a social analysis of things. And you know what they've done? This is going to show you how you can actually trap yourself here. Okay, a postmodernist did not disambiguate. They basically said there are no limits. There's nothing is right. Nothing is absolute. And so in making the statement that nothing is absolute, they have torn down all of their boundaries. And when you tear down boundaries, what they did is they decided they were going to follow the Hegelian dialectic. So they sit there and they debate back and forth. An idea comes up and then the antithesis comes up to that idea. So you have a thesis and then an antithesis or an antithesis. Okay, the antithesis sits there and debates with the thesis, and they go back and forth until they finally come to some sort of a resolve. And they come up with a new thesis because they have now combined these two things. Okay, now they've got this new thesis. What happens? An antithesis to the new thesis comes up. And then they debate back and forth. If you will notice, they will never get anywhere by this. And the reason they aren't going to get anywhere is because they don't have any boundaries to guide them. Okay, so they are stuck there. They will never get an answer to anything because they have no boundaries in which to contain the answer. So they cannot go beyond this stage of proof. They are onto it. They will start moving up and they will fall right back down and be stuck where they are. Okay, so we can get stuck because we don't know how to disambiguate.
What's that word again?
Disambiguate. Yeah, disambiguate. It's the word ambiguity, and it's putting dis in front of it. So it's disambiguate. Ambiguity is where it's not clear. It's fuzzy. Okay. So we actually have to learn to disambiguate. By the way, this also is where people begin to lose an ability to believe in God. Okay, I'll tell you how that happens here in a minute. Well, I'll go ahead and start with it now. What happens is you can't prove God. Okay, because trying to prove that something you can't see, a few people here, but you lock them up when they do. You've got all these little problems that go along with it, see, and you just can't prove this. Well, you also can't disprove it, but a lot of people like to grab a hold of the fact that if there's no proof, then it must not exist. Okay, that is correct. Her statement here was that it's like wind. You can't prove wind, but you can see the effect. That honestly is where you have to go before it's all finished. Now the next level, let me explain to you how you have with Aristotle and then producing Galilean thought. Now Aristotle would basically state that if I take a bow and I put an arrow in it, I pull back on it and I let it go, I can calculate where that arrow is going to land. Well, here's the problem. He could put so many pounds of weight back here, he could use the calculation, and he could tell you almost every time where the arrow was going to land. So he got good answers. He must be right, correct? The only problem is that in his model, the mathematics that he used, you were running out of force as it was going forward. And it was getting less and less force until it hit zero force. So the actual, if I graphed his theory, you would have it released here at the bow, and it would travel so many feet, even with the ground, and then drop to the ground. That's what his mathematics had done. Now, he was right. The answer came out correct. The only problem was he was also wrong because that wasn't the proper trajectory of the arrow. Okay, so then Galileo came along and he got a little bit more sophisticated math, took more things into consideration, realized that most of the time the archers, what they were doing to get it to go that far was changing the pitch of the arrow, and he calculated it out, and his arrow went in a trajectory like this. It was an arch, and then came down to the ground. Okay, that better portrayed reality. It was much more complicated. So a lot of people have taken these two technical stages and called one of them Aristotelian and the other one Galilean because of the advance that had come in mathematics between these two, and show that you can, the next level is to consider more things. Now what Galileo has done is he's basically said you have to take more into effect. There's more involved here. The arrow does go in an arc. It doesn't go straight. While Galileo had the same final end as Aristotle, Galileo's math and proof was quite more complex. Now, when you look at the taxonomy that I was talking about earlier, we mentioned the things that are outside of the boundaries, the platypus. When you see a platypus, you go, oh, it's a monster. That's why the British didn't accept it too well, you know? It's a monster. No, this is impossible. Now, you produce monsters and miracles when you're looking at things from an Aristotelian viewpoint. The monsters and miracles are something happens that is a miracle. It just didn't fit, so it must be a miracle. But something happens that doesn't fit, that's bad, it must be a monster. Well, Galileo says we must consider all monsters and miracles as a natural phenomenon. So Galileo basically produced it to where there's no such thing as miracles. Well, that really doesn't work well with religion, because religion always is talking about miracles. And so you can get to the point of looking at it from a Galilean perspective and all miracles disappear. No, there's got to be a natural phenomenon that brings this about. Okay, now you see how atheism works into the picture here.
Exactly.
Now, that's why I say this is a dangerous thing. This is dangerous. Because it requires experiential beyond the natural. And most people do not have experiential beyond the natural. A lot of times it's because they don't allow it to happen. They don't realize that they're doing anything to prevent it. You know, Linda said a couple of minutes ago, she says, you have to understand that there is evidence for the wind even though you can't see it. Sometimes the wind blows through and there's results. Incidentally, religion affects people and makes them do things. So there is a fact that religion has its place. Furthermore, Yah affects things. And we have to be able to identify those effects and say, yes, this is beyond natural reality. Okay? So, let's move it up here first. We say coalescence. One learns to incorporate multiple disciplines, developing more conclusive support. Let me talk about that just a little bit, because it means that you have to step outside of the boundary of what you study. For instance, a biologist. If you just remain a biologist and only study biology, you're not going to be able to get to this level of thought because you're so single focused. But when your biology and your astronomy and your geology and all of these things fit together and form a reasonable conclusion and they're all supporting it, then you've got a pretty good strong answer. Okay, with theology, there is so much more than just a doctrine. You see, with theology, you have archaeology that's a part of it. You have linguistics that is a part of our understanding. You have history that needs to be brought into it. See if you find historical evidence as well as archaeology, which is a part of it. You see, all of this has to be compiled. And when all of these things are supporting you, all right, you are working on a coalescence explanation. Incidentally, I was just got a paper that stated that we now have evidence that David's slewing of Goliath, we have found the city that is just, he was outside of when they killed Goliath, and they pulled up the oldest piece of pottery. The oldest piece of pottery with Hebrew written on it. This has been in the past few months. Actually, it's been published in the past few months. They might have found it 20 years ago, but it takes time for everything to come out. But anyway, okay, there we have archaeology supporting that not only did David exist, but the city. By the way, we didn't find the word David anywhere until Tel Dan. There was an inscription at Tel Dan that they actually found a reference to King David. And science today is saying that, or archaeology today is still saying, we haven't found David anywhere. But actually it was found in Tel Dan about 20 years ago. So now we've also got a city that didn't exist that has now been discovered, and they've uncovered the remains. We're slowly getting these things to put together to where we have more evidence that supports the historical, the historicity of the Bible. I'll just put it that way. Now, when you have the coalescence stage, we have to go through inclusion. So what are you going to include with this? You see, with the inclusion thinking, we have to come to transcendency. We need to be transcendent, and that means that there's going to be things that are going to be incorporated. I'm going to dare say an evil term here. Metaphysics. You see, there are things that are beyond a physical explanation. That has to be included in the mix of understanding. And you see, I'm not trying to talk about spiritualism in the negative sense here, but we have to be able to bring in that metaphysical, that spiritual, that untangible essence. And this is where Christianity, Judaism, and a belief in Yah returns. But I'll tell you, you don't have to lose your faith in here, but it takes somebody who's had a little bit of experience with God in a general sense to make it through these things, and that experience has to be so real, it's going to counteract that you have no physical proof. So it becomes very difficult. However, the question is do we really believe until we've made it through that?
It's just my call. Mysteries.
You know, the thing is that her experience won't really mean anything to me when you're here. It's going to have to be our experience. And so we need desperately to be building relationship with the Almighty. We need classes on building relationship with the Almighty. Till we have made it to that, we are going to be sending people off in a destructive pattern. Now, incidentally, who have been in seminaries that have gone through this and are not going to the seminaries that are just repeating what they already believe, those people are the ones that are going to be able to give the information that are going to support us or destroy us, because they're going to be the first ones that are looking at it in an objective manner. So objectivity is crucial. That's why you'll hear me say things sometimes that sounds like maybe I don't believe in what I'm getting ready to present. I'll give you an example. I attended Shavuot with the synagogues in Lexington, and they all get together for this. So we have the Reform rabbis and the Orthodox rabbis. I'll never forget the first time the Reform rabbi showed up, and that he was going to give his teaching. And his first words out of his mouth was, "If God really does exist." You could almost hear the silent gasp in the room that was from my congregation that had attended over there. You know, like, oh, I can't believe you said that. Okay, he wasn't making a statement of his own. He was trying to look at it from an objective standpoint and present from an objective standpoint so that the people could weigh the evidence themselves. If he presented it from a bias, then immediately people would weigh the evidence as he's biased. He's just giving his view. And so that actually has to be able to be brought forward. And we need to be doing that in our debates, because our debates can get rather vile if we haven't developed to understanding the other and respect for the other. We have to have respect for the other, or else we're never going to be able to bring any type of unity. Unity starts with respect for the outsider. Yeah. Yes.
Is that why on Facebook and many of these Houtz groups, they tend to have these debates that disintegrate into violence, spiritual violence?
Yeah, and that is actually where we are. It reveals our immaturity, because we are operating in that pseudo-technical stage. And we're going to lock ourselves there if we're not careful. And what happens is that I mean, some people say, I don't want to have anything to do with the Messianic movement. They're so vile with each other. Okay, I understand that. You know, we really have to get over that. And the only way we can do that is bringing about ectosunicism, which starts with respect for one another. In other words, you are a thinking person, and you have come to these conclusions for a good reason. Your experience teaches you this. Everything that you do is teaching you this. Okay, maybe you got it from a teacher who taught you this, but let's sit down and discuss it with respect. The second we show disrespect to one another, we devalue not only human life, but we bring the argument down into the gutter where we're ready to slay one another over it. Yeah, and so we can't do that. Yeshua taught us over and over and over again to treat one another with respect, speaking truth in love. Speaking truth in love isn't, I love you until you let me know that you disagree with me. Okay? Speaking truth in love is loving, and they know they're loved so much that they aren't afraid to share with you that they disagree with you. And then when they share that they disagree with you, if you continue to love them, you're building a relationship with them that is strengthening, because now they know that you don't reject them just because they have a different opinion. And we must continue in that process so that we can become ectosunicistic. We can say, look, I would not feel nice if you treated me in a bad fashion, so I can't treat you in that way. And as we develop in that, we can make it through this to where, you know, there can be a unity beyond our diversity. And we can actually do what God is calling us to do. I will stop there. And I can go on and on and on showing how you can determine where people are. I'll leave writings that I've done to do that. So I appreciate your all's willingness to let me share.
There you go. Very good. Very good. Any questions for him?